Good morning, welcome to Benalla Art Gallery. I'm Brenda Wellman, the Education and Public Programs Curator here. Eric Nash, our Director, is an apology. He's unwell today, so I've stepped in at the last minute. So this is my first event. I've just been here for 6 months, just new, so forgive me if I make any mistakes. I'll do my best. I've got some notes which I don't usually like to use, but I don't want to forget anything, so here we go. I'd like to start by acknowledging our traditional custodians and pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. Sorry, we've got a tech difficulty in the back. I'd like to welcome all of you here today, especially our colleagues from Council, our committee for the gallery and our friends of the gallery and our new visitors here today. So we're really pleased that you could come in your busy December, that's terrific. I'd like to introduce Katrina Sedgwick OAM, our guest here today, the Director and CEO of Australian Centre for Moving Image, better known as ACMI. This is a new series of talk that we've just started, which is called The Power of Cultural Infrastructure, and we're going to be hearing from speakers from different institutions talking about their real-world and wide-ranging benefits that are being achieved. We're going through a redevelopment process that's being planned, and these talks will give us ideas for the future and what can be achieved. We're looking to identify social, cultural and economic outcomes and how that can feed into the feasibility study that's been done for the gallery and how that can inform our future plans. We've already had state government funding of $3 million for our stage 1, so we're on the way to a redevelopment, and that's a really exciting proposition for the gallery, the Benalla community and the wider region. So we're really excited that you can be part of this and to join us on this journey through this great adventure that we're going to be on. This series of talk has been made possible through our partnership with M Pavilion and RACV, and it's through their Amplify program partnership, which we have shared values of community, advocacy, creativity and collaboration, and we've been working with RACV and M Pavilion. Is it 12 months or more? 2 years. So 2 COVID years, which is like dog years, so say 14 years. And this is the one I'm not going to remember these, so we'd specifically like to thank Megan Ballantyne, Marty Nowak, Alan Wignall, Sam Redstone, Jen Zelinka, Molly Braden and Phil, our tech guru today. The talk is being recorded, so the people that haven't been able to come today will be able to see it at a later date. It'll be on M Pavilion's website and ours, so we hope that you'll share it with your networks and people that want to be involved with the future of Benalla's prosperity and the gallery. That's all that I want to say. We're just going to get Katrina to come up and talk about the new ACMI. It's been going through a 5-year redevelopment and it's just opened this year. Eric and I had a chat yesterday about our experiences of ACMI, and he's from North Queensland, he's from Townsville, and he came down several years ago specifically to see the William Kentridge exhibition at ACMI. I came with my daughter from Ballarat and we had a fantastic day, and we both talked about that experience and how ACMI offers such a treasure, such a fantastic experience. He took his little daughter down to the new ACMI just a couple of weeks ago, she's won, and he said she was just gorgeous to watch, squealing with delight at the Disney exhibition. So I want to thank, and I know everyone thanks ACMI and Katrina and the team for putting on such fantastic exhibitions and bringing us so much enrichment to our lives. So welcome, Katrina, and we look forward to your talk.
Thank you so much, and it's really terrific to be here, and I too would like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional lands of First Nations people and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. It's really great to be here. I'm not a Victorian person originally. I grew up in South Australia and spent quite a lot of time in Sydney, so I only moved to Melbourne 7 years ago for this job. And so it's my first time in Benalla, and what a beautiful town. We came up yesterday, had dinner at the Northo last night, wandered around the streets. It's just exquisite, and it was exciting to see, as you do so often, the turn-off to Benalla proudly saying that the art gallery is the #1 attraction for this city, followed by the gliding school. You know, I think we can't underestimate the importance of kind of rich cultural infrastructure in regional towns and cities, and how important they are for attracting all-important visitors to the city. And then this morning we've been talking, and I'm just so impressed with the attendance figures that this gallery achieves. It's absolutely extraordinary, really. I understand the population of Benalla is about 14,000 people. On an unusual year, I think you get 32,000 visitors to the art gallery, and I think if you get the same level of population as visitation to your museum or gallery, that's seen as success. So it's remarkable, and I believe the last year, in COVID times, when I think all of us have really understood how important culture is in our lives, as it was kind of taken away when we were locked in our houses and had to rely on our screens, which is where ACME comes in. You know, I think we really value locally how important that is, and so I think you've actually had record attendances over the last year despite COVID, despite being shut for many weeks and days. 170 days you were open? 170 days closed across the last 12 months, still achieved 43,000 visitors. You know, if that's not an argument for government to invest, I don't know what is. It's incredible. So I'm here really just to talk about the journey we've been on with ACME. So I'll dive into my presentation, and afterwards we'll have questions if you have any. So Melbourne has been the home of many important firsts for many things, and I will just say to start with, when we talk about important cultural infrastructure, one of the great things about coming to Melbourne and to run a museum here is Melbourne is actually home of the most visited state library in the country, the most visited natural history museum in the country, the most visited art gallery in the country, and the most visited museum of the moving image, unsurprisingly, because we're the only one. You know, it's a real sign that Melbourne and its community and its visitors are very, very interested in engaging in ideas, in stories, and in shared cultural experiences in these very important civic spaces that these agencies are. So we've been the home of many important firsts in moving image culture. In fact, Melbourne is where the first feature film in the world was produced, the story of the Kelly Gang, way back in 1906. We also invented one of the first computer games that had kind of global impact. I don't know if many of you played The Hobbit. I did as a child. Pretty funny to look at it now, I tell you. We actually have a copy of this in our collection as one of the few museums in Australia. In fact, I think we're the only one that really seriously has collected Australian video games. And we are the National Museum of all of these things that relate to moving image. So when we talk about moving image, we mean film, television, video games, digital culture and art. And of course, when we're talking about digital culture, that's including social media across its extraordinary impact and reach. We also engage, of course, not just with narrative forms, but also documentary forms, with news, with self-documentation, with home movies, the full gamut. We were established by the Victorian Government in 2002 as a foundation tenant of Federation Square. And it's had an illustrious time, beginning quite, in a difficult environment and expanding rapidly, so that when I arrived in 2015 to take up the helm as Director and CEO, it really was a flourishing institution with terrific visitation. I think by then we'd built to 1.2 million visitors a year, which is quite big. And so coming in, just quickly, my background is I was a performer working across, worked in television, film, theatre, street theatre, education, over the early sort of first decade of my career, and then moved into festivals, mainly in Adelaide, working in multi-arts festivals. I then ended up founding the the inaugural Adelaide Film Festival, which was established by Mike Rann when he came in to power with the Labor government in 2001. I worked on that for a decade, and we had a commissioning fund, and out of that I became Head of Arts at ABC Television for 3 years in Sydney, and then came down to work with ACME. So I've got a real interest in kind of the power of multiple art forms and the way that different areas of creative practice talk to each other. I'm really interested in that kind of cross-disciplinary approach, which of course now, if you're a young person, it's all just content. Everything is content. The silos that I certainly grew up with, of visual art being here, opera being here, ballet being here, contemporary dance there, literature there, all of that's gone. Everything is content. And I think that's hugely exciting. It breaks down barriers to access, and it enables people to move sort of nimbly between ideas, between forms, and feel empowered and engaged and excited to explore those stories and then talk about them in a way that perhaps previously was seen as a little bit more status-driven, a little bit more exclusive and elite, and excluded people, I think. So that's kind of the ethos that I've been bringing to ACME, and so as director began a sort of a process of transformation. One of the first things we did, or I did, was talk to the staff and stakeholders about what are the problems with ACME, what are the things that we need to solve. And the biggest one was, well, what is ACME? What is the centre of the moving image? What on earth does that mean? And how can our audiences read and understand that better? And I should say that by being located in Federation Square, 50% of our audiences were tourists, because it's such an iconic destination in Melbourne that people would just turn up and then they just randomly find this thing called ACME. It's like, what is that? People I can't read it. We were in an incredible location, but we had very, very poor visibility. We didn't even have a sign over our door. It took me about 4 years to negotiate having ACME over the front door in Flinders Street. But it was very confusing. People just couldn't understand what we were. So consequently, even though we had big visitation, we had quite low brand awareness. We're actually a museum, we're not a centre. So trying to kind of shift that thinking within the organisation and more broadly, which also I think museum is such a kind of powerful word. It evokes so much, it evokes status, and frankly when you're fundraising, it's much easier to persuade people to invest in a museum than a centre, which to me sounds a bit like a sort of a research arm of a university. The other thing is we were inhabiting a space that originally in Federation Square, we were meant to be sited somewhere else, and at the last minute ACME got moved to the Alfred Deakin building, which had been designed as a retail space. It's a very vertical space, so we were a very vertical museum spread over 4 floors, cinemas on the top floor, shop and cafe on the next floor, and education studios. Next floor, a couple of exhibition spaces and a event space, and then downstairs our big permanent, temporary space, which is where Eric would have seen the Disney show that we've got on at the moment. So we're very kind of siloed physically. People could come into the museum and engage with an exhibition and have no idea that there were cinemas upstairs and vice versa. And so it created a very kind of fractured experience, which again sort of undermined our statement that we were this holistic museum. So how could we kind of tackle that? And critically, the really urgent thing that the organisation was already trying to work on was that we had this ageing core exhibition called Screen World. So this was created in 2009 and was a game changer for ACMI. It's an exhibition that attracted, in its last full year, 660,000 visitors. So, you know, it really drove our visitation. It told the story of the past and present of the moving image, a very kind of comprehensive show, but it was an exhibition that was designed, as most exhibitions are, to stay the same. So when I turned up, there was a little glass dome, which actually you can probably see the edge of it right in the corner of that image. Anyway, that had a sign that said 1991 to the present day, which bear in mind is 2009. Now that was just as the iPhone arrived in Australia. So they had an iPhone 3 in the case, which miraculously was still working when we closed it. So much for redundant technology, but a little bit old-fashioned, because of course in the meantime, I mean, smartphones have completely revolutionised how we engage with moving image content. We now walk around with these incredibly powerful computers in our pockets that enable us to consume high-end moving image content wherever we want to, whenever we want to. And not only to do that, we also can make it and we can distribute it. So in fact, we've all become broadcasters in the intervening time, and that's had a profound impact on our society, as we all know, and of course social media is driving a huge amount of that. So we needed to create an exhibition that was designed to change and to evolve, to be able to keep those kinds of historic stories that we needed to tell, but also to respond to the changing environment around us. I should say an exhibition of that kind, its life is usually 7 years. It was 10 years by the time we closed it. So the opportunities for us were that we were by far the most visited museum of the moving image in the world. The Museum of the Moving Image, MoMI, in New York. It is in Queens, it's not in Manhattan. They are a really prestigious museum. They get about 250,000 visitors a year. So we're kind of knocking it out of the park, which is exciting. Another opportunity was our kind of relevance and purpose, and I think I've just explained that. Moving image is so all-pervasive in our lives and daily becoming more and more so. And as a museum, a kind of core purpose for us is about, fostering digital and media literacy in our community. How do we not just accept unquestioningly the content that's being fed to us, that algorithms are discovering for us and sending us every single day? How do we analyse and explore deeply and choose the content that we see? And I think that role of sort of digital literacy, but media literacy, is actually a foundational skill that you need to live purposefully in a democracy now. So it's a really, really crucial purpose. And of course, unbeknownst to us, when COVID arrived and we had to live through our screens to get out to the outside world, screens have become even more central. We also had the opportunity to weave a digital strategy into the fabric of our museums. And when we talk about digital, usually in the context of museums, digital is about marketing and a bit of sort of projection and video and so on. But digital actually allows a huge amount of quite radical shifts in how we work together and how we engage with practitioners and how we engage with our audiences. And there's enormous opportunities to think quite radically in that space. And around us, things were changing too. In Victoria, I arrived just as the Labor government got in, and they made quite a dramatic shift from having an agency called Arts Victoria. They renamed it to Creative Victoria, and in doing so embraced the creative industries rather than purely just the arts. A very clever thing to do, I think, because they then were able to look at how does creativity play right out across our economy. And of course, creativity is everywhere and a huge driver in the economy. So when you're looking at creative industries, you're thinking not just about architecture, about fashion, about video games. You're also looking at the role of design in industry. So for example, in manufacturing, kind of the creative application of design in manufacturing, how does that impact. So they did a measurement and they worked out that, in fact, the creative industries equate to 8% of Victoria's economy. That's huge. That's bigger than manufacturing. So that really changed the discussion in government around how they fund the arts and creative industries, and it's been super powerful. And so we've, in creating our budget bid to get our kind of transformation to happen, really aligned with a whole lot of different policies in government, and I'll talk you through the sort of plethora of them a little bit later. Also vitally, understanding that First Nations is at the centre of Australian culture, and then that position of First Nations being at the centre is about self-representation. It's not about other people talking about First Nations culture, it's about First Nations people speaking for themselves. And that's been really transformative for our institution, alongside understanding that Melbourne is an incredibly diverse place. Culturally, how do we reflect that in our programs, and how do we reflect that and therefore engage with a really broad audience, not just the sort of inner south, east and north Melbourne audiences and kind of middle class audiences coming to visit Victoria. How do we make sure that we're engaging with a really, really culturally diverse cohort who drive so much of our economy? And also for us, I think, really thinking about the ecology of makers and creatives, which I think is really core to the purpose of cultural institutions. It's not just about showing stuff. How do we foster people to create stuff? And when we talk about that, that's not just the professionals, that's the amateurs, that's the children who are going to become the makers, and supporting that really rich, multidimensional ecology. And another key thing for us is in the kind of work that we do, there's been a big shift into experiential design, very kind of theatrical and immersive design, particularly in exhibition making, but also I think in building making. How do we think about a whole experience as you come into an institution, and really think about all those kind of touch points, those rich sort of moments that are not just about the work that you're seeing, but about the cafe experience, about how you find your way around, the wayfinding. All of those things are really kind of important to consider. So number one, how do we articulate our institutional value? And that's a super important thing and really, really hard to do succinctly. What we say is we exist to enrich our lives and foster our creative industries by illuminating the moving images, screens and technologies that define our age. We also need to think about who our audiences are, and for us, the simplest way we could describe it is that our audiences are watchers, players and makers, which pretty much is everyone, but defining it through that particular prism is appropriate for ACME. But when we talk about our audiences, we think about three different audiences: the public, the education, and when we talk about the education audience, we're thinking primary, secondary and tertiary institutions, and then industry, as I've just mentioned. And that kind of triangle, when we hit our sweet spot, I suppose, it's when those three things come together, because we can see the end product pretty easily. Not everything we show, but a lot of the things we show, as I say, you can watch on your phone, but a lot of what we do is illuminate process. So really unpacking how things are made and why things are made, and then juxtaposing them against other art forms. And that sort of sweet spot is when you bring together public, education and industry as audiences and participants to illuminate that process. We're really interested in the role of the museum, where it's about humans making choices as audience members, as creatives and as programmers, and getting past algorithms, which now make a lot of choices for us. That civic purpose that I've talked about before, we need to be a shared cultural space for everybody. How do we invite a really broad range of people into the museum? It's not exclusive, it's broad, it's democratic. it's embracing and it's inspiring for everybody, we hope. We want to challenge the dominant narratives, and that's particularly important in ACME. Of course, we want to engage with Thor and Marvel films, but we also want to engage with Middle Eastern cinema and African cinema and Eastern European cinema and the incredible trends that are coming out of South America and television, and, you know, really engage with the kind of breadth of cultural practice that's so influential. And, as I mentioned before, foster this critical media literacy. So when I arrived, we started to make immediate change, and I would say to any institution, embedding kind of change, risk, experimentation into the DNA of the institution is crucial. Just trying stuff out. It doesn't matter if it doesn't last forever, it doesn't matter if it fails, but experimenting and learning from those experiments is really crucial, and particularly as you move into something that's big, I think those small experiments are important. So one of the things we did was set up a co-working space and an accelerator. Most of our staff, our programming and administrative staff don't fit on site anymore. As we've expanded public space, we've had to close our offices and move elsewhere. So we moved into a new office space close by and got a large enough footprint that we could house not only our ACME staff, but 60 co-working desks, and at the moment we've got 20 different small businesses that engage with the screen in its broadest sense, working with us. Of course, COVID's slowed that down a bit, I have to say, but there's still a really engaged community who we talk to all the time and who are gradually coming back into the office space with our staff, and again that goes to supporting this ecology. We've got the State Film Archive. We have 250,000 objects, artworks, films and videos in our collection, and so we're rapidly digitising that and moving that online, and there's just some absolutely beautiful films from the last 120 years in Victoria and beyond, and we're wanting to make that as accessible as we can. We've also been expanding our commissioning program so that we're really pushing hard into that area of cross-art form collaboration and experimentation. So one thing we set up was a virtual reality commission where we invited visual artists who've got established practice, gallery-based practice, so they might be a painter or a sculptor or a photographer or a video artist, and we funded them properly to be able to make an artwork as virtual reality work. So Joan Ross came in and made a fantastic work called Did You Ask the River? Really wonderful, very interactive virtual reality work. And then Christian Thompson made an absolutely beautiful virtual reality work called Baya Gardia about his lands that he's from. And we also did a lot of experimenting with our exhibition design. We make a lot of small and large-scale exhibitions, which we then tour nationally and internationally. And so really kind of pushing that sort of theatrical, immersive design has been something that we've really been working hard on since about 2016. So we then needed to kind of create this budget bid, and this is a very kind of quick slide that doesn't really reveal the huge amount of work that developing a bid that I'm sure many of you have contributed to for Benalla. It's a huge task. We took, in order to secure money, we started mid-2015 and we weren't fully funded until May of 2019. So it was a long and complex process. Similar to Benalla, we were funded in 2 stages, which was super helpful. It just gives you the time to do the kind of creative thinking and master planning that you need to do before you get into the detail. But as we sort of developed this budget bid, and I talked before about a government who came in with quite a strong policy agenda, we looked at how our bid could really meaningfully connect with a whole range of policies. So we didn't just look at the creative industries and arts policy. We looked at tourism, we looked at jobs, we looked at economic development, we looked at education, we looked at innovation and technology, which is a big push for the government, and we looked at the sort of the brand identity of Melbourne and Victoria. And a lot of this for the government is about building the economy and building jobs. So they're looking at how do we attract new business to Melbourne and to Victoria, and that's a lot about our brand as being a place that is culturally vibrant, that if you move here, you're going to have a really rich and satisfying life for you and your family, that there's lots of opportunity for people to collaborate with across multiple sectors, and the cultural institutions, the creative industries is a huge part of building that brand. And there's numerous examples around the world of places that have been kind of in the economic doldrums. Victoria hasn't been, but I'm thinking of places like Bilbao, where, you know, it had been a kind of a home of manufacturing industry and kind of port activity, and it really, the sort of economy of that city just fell by the wayside over the sort of mid-20th century. They were really struggling as a city, their population was dropping, and they formed a partnership with the Guggenheim and raised money and built this astonishing Bilbao Guggenheim Museum there that was the centrepiece of a whole kind of policy agenda that was about beautifying the city, putting in good public transport and becoming a major kind of attractor. The brand of that city completely transformed. It changed the economy of that city. I've been there and visited it. It is stunning, that museum. I went specifically for that, spent money, as do hundreds of thousands of tourists every single year, bringing valuable money in, making it an attractor for business, and it has turned around the economy of that region through that kind of cultural investment. So, you know, there's all sorts of models that we can talk about, but for us, we really kind of were inspired by that kind of thinking as we built our brand, and it was a very strong bid. What we did was really illustrate how ACME is embedded in the ecology of Melbourne, and again, that really holistic thinking across all those touch points, why ACME is important in that space took us a long time to articulate, but I think we did it pretty well. We talked about how we're a collector and an exhibitor, but we're a collaborator, we're an instigator, we're a nurturer and an innovator, and all of those things are super important and perhaps different to what you would immediately think a museum or gallery could be. And we worked with a company called SGS to write our bid, and they came up through very, very robust economic modelling, a return on investment of 9 to 1. Now, you want to have about 4 to 1 in a bid, so it's pretty profound. And again, you're measuring economic outcomes, not just about what's happening through the door, but what's our impact in the education sector, and what does that mean financially? What's our impact in the tourism sector? What's our impact in jobs? And not just jobs that we're generating, but jobs that we're supporting to be generating across the creative industries and beyond. So it's a really kind of complex matrix, but a very kind of successful one when you're bidding to government as to why they should be supporting your particular bid. So our project was about a $40 million project, and of that, 36.6 million came from the government, and we got every cent we asked for. We really, really worked hard on making sure that it was a very tight budget. We justified every single dollar. They listened and we got it. So it was really fantastic. And that funding enabled us to go beyond what a traditional film or game or media museum can be. The work that we did was architectural, it was programmatic, it was technological, and we used a co-design methodology that really ensured that the talent that was within the museum team really collaborated with all of those other teams to deliver the best possible and most kind of authentic outcome. It wasn't about somebody else coming in and just depositing their vision on top of us. It was about us really working hard together to go, what does this place, this space and this community need, and how do we meaningfully then connect with the architectural vision? How do we build a kind of exhibition and experience design that makes sense? How do we make those two things talk together, architectural design? And I don't know if many of you have worked with architects, but they're pretty tricky to get to collaborate and think outside their particular vision. And our architects, BKK, Melbourne-based firm, were just fantastic in being very open, very, very collaborative with our team. And inside ACME, we've got highly experienced designers, curators, programmers, but also an absolute world-leading experience and developer team in terms of UX design, coding and experiential design, and I'll talk about the outcomes of some of that soon. So we delivered a new curatorial framework, completely redeveloped the permanent galleries, created a new learning centre for our education visits, an audience lab for the screen industries where you can come and beta test your programs. I'll mention that a bit later. A media preservation lab for our collections team. A really holistic technology-enhanced visitor experience, and crucially to a new brand and identity. And I was a bit dubious on how much impact that would have. It's way more than a logo, and it really has made a big change. But all of this is about delivering an expanded reach, impact and public value of our institution. And while we were doing all of that, we also needed to think about, okay, well, this is going to deliver new ways of working. So we did a staff-led restructure. Our cohort is about 250 people when we're operating, but we've got about 135 sort of full-time equivalents working for us in the museum. So they really led this process of restructure, analysing what we needed to do that was different and how we needed to deploy the resources in the organisation to get to that. It wasn't about redundancies, it was about opportunities. And that enabled us to reshape our organisation to deliver the new things that we were going to do. Oh, I'm pressing the wrong button. So we closed our museum in May 2019. COVID struck in March 20. Fortunately, building and construction was able to keep going, so we kept going. And but that experience of COVID, and particularly in Melbourne, where we had a very long time being locked inside, we realised that the sort of digital ambition that we had could also be expanded. So in October 2020, we launched our award-winning brand identity. We worked actually with we did a big tender process across Australia, but we ended up working with a British company, North, who they're based in London. They did the Barbican precinct identity. They did the identity for the Tate. Across all of their museums. They did the science museums. They're doing a huge precinct in Kowloon, in West Kowloon in Hong Kong. And they really understood the challenge of being a museum in an environment like Fed Square that has such a dominant architecture and of course has a heritage listing overlay, just like this building. What does that mean and how do you inhabit that and how can you pop within that? And their brand that they've delivered for us has won, I think, a dozen international design awards so far. It's been extremely successful, and here you have it on the front of the building. It kind of responds to the architecture. It doesn't feel jarring, but it also really has a very strong identity that pops. Also, when you look at it, they came to us with, you know, a kind of a page full of kind of leading museums from across the nation, but also globally, and we could see how much this strength of identity really popped when you looked at in this kind of global and national conversation. When we talk about extending the digital space, there was a whole lot of work we were doing that related directly to the visit, but we realised we could expand permanently into online spaces. Everyone was moving their film festivals online, so we used that technology. We've got 2 large cinemas in ACMI. We now have a digital cinema, Cinema 1, 2 on site, and we now have Cinema 3 online, and that houses us and the many film festivals that we house who couldn't afford to set up that kind of digital structure. We can enable it for them. So hybrid models of festival delivery where you have in-cinema screenings and online screenings are going to be a permanent feature from now on. Likewise for things like the Australian International Documentary Conference, which we sponsor and house. We also created Gallery 5. So we've got 4 gallery spaces in ACMI. We now have a 5th gallery space online, and it's exclusively there to commission and showcase work that's created for online. This is a huge area of creative practice, and it's a great way for us to show it. And, you know, we were making this enormous permanent exhibition, which is called The Story of the Moving Image, and all these great stories were there. We were seeing galleries around the world having these sort of virtual 360 experiences, and we thought rather than do that, we'll create a kind of web version of an exhibition, riffing out of the sort of stories and research that we've done for the story of the moving image. And I encourage you to go and have a look at it. It's quite interesting, a really elegant kind of journey through a web interface into sort of exhibition making. So after 20 months, we were hoping initially that it would take us about 12 months to do the building works. It took 20, but let's bear in mind there was a global pandemic while we were on, so we're pretty pleased with that. And we did it on budget, which I think is a miracle. We opened up. The big hook that we said was that we are your museum of screen culture. And that's been a really great kind of new driver for conversation. We spent a lot of money on the kind of social spaces within the museum. When we talk about civic purpose of museums, it's not just about seeing work, it's also hanging out and talking about it. And so we really spent money. You see on the left-hand side of the image the beautiful urban lounge that we've created. And on a weekend at the moment, it's just full of families and young people sitting there. There's plugs, so you can plug in and charge your laptop or your phone. We've got amazing Wi-Fi. It's fully licensed, and there's a food cart, so you can just eat and snack in all the public spaces. So it's really trying to encourage that kind of social conviviality, I suppose. And that big staircase is a big gesture to try and again connect the different floors of the museum in a far more visible way. And on our opening weekend, we had this beautiful dance piece that was commissioned, had these dancers come in and do kind of dance highlights from all these iconic films, and you see the eager audience below. It was just wonderful. Here's a school. We do school briefings in that urban space. And when we're open, we can barely keep up with demand from all these different schools coming in to enjoy the spaces. Upstairs, we worked with our exhibition and experience designers to recreate social spaces up there. So we've got a beautiful big foyer that's full of museum content. So as you come into the building, when we were talking before about how do you know what this is, what a centre of the moving image is, you come in and immediately there's content that alerts you to the fact that this is a museum, and here's all these iconic things that relate to the moving image. In the middle of that, you can see on the right-hand side those shelves that are full of kind of all sorts of historical objects from the history of the museum. They're from our collection. Our collections team used to be housed on the other side of Fed Square in the basement of a building, completely invisible. And it was a real treat when you got to go in there, but hardly anyone got to go. Now we've got them in the foyer of the exhibition, of the museum. So as you come in, you can see these beautiful and fascinating objects, and so many people go up and go, I had that computer, I had that, my dad had that camera, which gets you in, and then you look through the glass case and you realise that there's people working in there, doing preservation, caring for all of these really important audiovisual memories that are so key to our lives. So this is the view from the inside, and we are literally digitising every single day, Monday to Friday, in that space. Beautiful education spaces supported by Gandel, the Gandel Foundation, and these are fantastic spaces where kids and adults come together and talk about how things are made. They learn how things are made, and this is another space where kids are doing the same. This is a place for more kind of desk-based learning, where you're learning how to edit or make an animation. This little kid is making a really beautiful sort of light and shadow-based animation, light and shadow being, of course, the building blocks of the moving image. So he's made a little screen there, and you can see it from the other side as he animates his monster creature. Beautiful studio. We used to have an event space down on Flinders Street. So as you walked by, all you'd see is blackness, black curtains, as people were meeting inside. We've moved the shop down there instead. So now we've got retail frontage, and inside the building, looking out on the first floor through this magnificent heritage listed architecture, we've got this event space where we have lots of talks and programs, and a big partnership with Swinburne University. But this is also, really importantly, a commercial hire space. So people come in and hire it out. In fact, we've got our first wedding there in December, which I'm thrilled about. So that's really important revenue generating for ACME. We make a lot of money through our commercial and food and beverage activities, which is just crucial for our activities. And I talked before about, it's all about human curation at ACME and how do we use digital to enable people to access that human curation and that human expertise. And the other kind of key point is that we want to influence what you choose to watch and play after you've visited. It's not just about what you do inside the museum. We want to keep that conversation and impact going after you leave. So now when you turn up to the museum, you get a lens. It's a recyclable cardboard take-home tool, and actually I should have updated this is an old slide because there's actually now 2 million taps and counting, but the idea of this is to make the visit memorable, but to make it useful and keep the impact going beyond the physical museum itself. So design-wise, we're inspired by the old Viewmaster slides, and so we've created this wonderful lens in partnership with Swinburne Centre for Design Innovation. So at the top you can see on the left at the top you can see that sort of design with the little lines. Hidden inside that is a NFC chip, and when you flip it over you've got your own code, so you can go up and tap that lens to every single label in the exhibition. And I've got a video that's going to explain it as I talk it through. So you can go and tap it on any single label in the exhibition, and then when you go home, you go to the URL there, ACME Lens, and put in your code, and you can then see everything that you've collected and explore it more deeply. So your time in the exhibition, you might only have an hour and a half, you're able to look and get excited, but there are things that you really want to explore more deeply. Well, the website can do that for you. And the website can also take you to other things that, because you're interested in that, you might be interested in something else. And so it can connect you to all of these things. The story of the moving image itself is a 1,600 square metre exhibition. As I said, it's designed to evolve and change. When we began the exhibition, when we talk about First Nations being at the centre of Australian culture, we began the curatorial journey by meeting with 25 leaders of screen industries from right across Australia. This was facilitated through Screen Australia, the federal film agency, and their Indigenous department. And they talked to us about how storytelling has been happening using light and shadow in Australia for 60,000 years. We have the longest continuous living culture in the world. And that use of light and shadow, that continuum of storytelling, has then started in a different way with the arrival of film, and First Nations people have used that technology very innovatively to share their stories across their nation, across their communities, as it's kind of arrived. So we wanted to kind of work out how we could reflect that, and we commissioned Gunditjmara artist Vicky Cousins to create this work, supported by the Maya Foundation, and Vicky created this work called Yanmiar, and I'll get her to tell you a little bit about it in her own words here.
My name's Vicky Cousins and I'm a Kiriwarra Gunditjmara woman from the Western Districts of Victoria. The name of the work is Yanmiar, and it means flickering in the firelight. The whole work is about where does moving image originate from, with shadows and light. And it comprises a 300 kilo acrylic lens suspended from the ceiling with figures who were set out in a formation in corroboree in ceremony, giving people the opportunity to perhaps see the world through our lens.
So that starts and finishes the exhibition. It's a two-part work. And it's a really kind of powerful and beautiful way to enter the exhibition. And you've got the lens of Yanmar above, and then you pick up this really innovative cardboard lens below. And as I said, the exhibition itself is designed to change and provide experiences that can evolve and reflect we all as we change. There's a mix of kind of fantastic contemporary art and traditional objects, media experiences, and lots of immersive experiences as you wander through the exhibition. It's just a beautiful design. It's very interactive and a lot of kind of immersive storytelling. This is looking at Edward Muybridge's sort of groundbreaking photography, where he really kind of broke up how movement works and over time, and you can kind of see those photographs up above, and those kids are playing with these 3 screens where we've got footage and an interface where you can slowly move things forward or backwards. You can speed it up, you can slow it down, you can stop it, and just playing with that notion that as soon as it gets into this kind of technology, you can control time. Again, this is a wonderful interactive experience called the Edit Line, where there's a whole lot of very brief, iconic clips from very well-known films and television shows, and you can get in there and just use these building blocks and swap them around and kind of edit your own kind of sentence that kind of comes together from all of these different clips, tiny little clips, and then you can save that and take it home. So it's all about making stuff and learning about stuff and bringing it back. There's a really wonderful section on video games. Melbourne, when we talk about the ecology of Melbourne, Melbourne's actually one of the most interesting places in the world for the development of independent games at the moment. It's quite remarkable. So we showcase video games, but a big focus on Melbourne, and actually Ballarat has a really big, vibrant community as well. And that changes out regularly. It's my son there, actually, playing on one of the arcade games. You have to rope everybody in for photo shoots. There's a whole section called Moving Minds, which really dives into this sort of factual truth in the moving image section. So looking at kind of documentary, but news and journalism, social media, home movies. And this is a beautiful memory garden, which is like a kind of forest that you enter, and you can go to these columns and you can kind of capture in your hands these beautiful digitised home movies that come from our collection, the National Film and Sound Archive, the Koori Heritage Trust and the Bill Onus Family Archive. And it's just, again, just this beautiful moment to kind of cradle these very tender and poignant memories and think deeply about how we need to care for this audiovisual memory. And the last experience in the exhibition is the constellation. That's where you can tap your lens on a table and explore what you've collected through these kind of constellations that have been curated by our curators and experts. So let's say you collected a Kurosawa film, so let's say The Seven Samurai, as you went through. Our curators will have thought about that, and in the same way that you've got a universe of stars and human beings have created these constellations to create a story, in the universe of content, our curators, rather than an algorithm, have found these connections to The Seven Samurai, which might connect to Quentin Tarantino, who's hugely influenced that, who actually featured in an episode of The Simpsons. And The Simpsons actually influenced this particular video game, which has actually influenced this particular visual artist. And you create these kind of amazing connections that you would never find on Google. You would never find fed to you by an algorithm, but our curators are interested in those connections across these forms. And when you get home, you can explore them all further. And it's also designed as a social experience. So how do we get people together to explore this stuff and to talk about stuff? It's been working really well with schools too. So as I say, you log in when you get home and you can keep watching and playing. So here's a little bit of a look. You get your lens on your mobile phone and you've put in your code. There's your visit with all of the things that you've collected. You collected Mad Max Fury Road. Okay, you can actually get directed now to where you can watch Mad Max. So there we are, we take you to all the platforms that you can rent it on and you can have a look. So again, just connecting people and trying to keep that conversation going. Another thing I just want to highlight when we talk about ecology, this isn't a place, but a concept that we're doing with RMIT, where we work with them to bring in makers as they're developing say, a VR experience or a video game, or they're making a TV series, they can actually bring in the project before it's finished in the same way that they would take it to a focus group. And instead of it being this kind of artificial environment with 25 people in a room, instead they bring it to a museum where you've got a whole lot of curious visitors who come up and go, what's this? And then they get to play with it, and then they get to talk about it. And it's this kind of real world testing, if you like, which is brilliant for both the maker, who's getting this incredible research about what's working or not working, but it's amazing for the audience member to meet the maker and find out what problems are they trying to solve and so on. So it's this really brilliant kind of well, I suppose it's where that sweet spot comes together, that sort of industry, education and public in this kind of beautiful, beautiful moment. The shop is now downstairs. It's such a great shop. If you're looking for Christmas gifts, it's online and it's got great stuff in it. But this now gives us really important Flinders Street frontage, so that as punters or potential punters are walking past the street, they can look and go, oh, that's a museum shop. It's a museum. I'll go inside and have a look. And the other really important thing we did was invest heavily in a really good restaurant. It took 2 years to get it right, but we've now got this beautiful, again, award-winning restaurant called Hero, beautifully designed, and Karen Martini is our chef, and she's just fantastic. So as at June 30, we were open 106 days. We had reached 106 million people through print and broadcast media across Australia and around the world. Our main international media was through China, the US, the UK, Germany and New Zealand, which handily are the key places our international visitors come from. 4,100 press articles. At June 30, we had 1.6 million objects collected by the lens and dozens of awards. So just really ramping up the kind of prestige, visibility, making our brand much more present. And getting great coverage like this. The Weekend Australian, has a national reach, and just talking about us as a state-of-the-art institution designed to change the way people interact with museums. Thank you, Weekend Australia. That's exactly what we wanted you to say. So now I think we can say that we're a truly multi-platform museum. I think we're ready and well positioned for the next couple of decades. I think we've really expanded reach and access. I think we're a genuinely innovative institution that's supporting brand Melbourne and helping us become an incredibly important destination. And I think we're very happy that government agrees that that investment in cultural infrastructure has really paid off for them. It's highly visible investment in cultural infrastructure, and that ROI promise is going to be realised. So thank you. That's it for my presentation. Before I finish, I just want to acknowledge Sam and M Pavilion and also the Naomi Milgram Foundation. One of the reasons I'm here, the main reason I'm here, aside from the opportunities to visit Bedalla and your art gallery, is this partnership that we have with the foundation. It's been terrific. It's been actually going really, probably for a decade. We've been working with Naomi in different ways. The foundation came on and supported our final moment, which is a new contemporary gallery space at the end of our exhibition, and it houses an international work that really reflects or sums up the experience that you've had through the exhibition. Currently a wonderful work by Oscar Fischinger. But we've also always worked closely with M Pavilion and the broader goals of that institution. And again, when we talk about the ecology of Melbourne, the kind of collaboration has so much kind of richness, I think, because it's very shared values in terms of how can we foster and support the industries. And when Sam contacted me about this, it was again a really kind of key moment for values alignment, where this kind of mutual investment in supporting the ecology across Victoria. How can we make the creative industries really drive this state and be the best it can be? And so I want to thank Sam and Naomi for inviting me, and thank the Benalla Art Gallery also for inviting me. Thank you.
Just before you sit down, if there are any questions, we've got some time for some questions.
I'm just curious, I'll probably go home a little bit on that piece first. The human connection with the moving image has a significant history in flickering fire on a pale wall, and then in Western culture we have a significant record of camera obscura as a device for creating a lens, or not a lens, but a projected image onto a surface of a wall. I'm just wondering whether you have knowledge of this interesting or record of, or future interest in the idea of the camera obscura installation.
So we're super interested in camera obscura, and that's the question. Are we interested? Yes, we are. We're really interested in pre-cinema and all of those things that led to it. The image I showed earlier, where are we? Here we are. This work here is actually, it's a contemporary artwork that is riffing off Pepper's Ghost. Pepper's Ghost was a sort of a trick that was created in the late 19th century, and it used to travel around in kind of sideshows, a bit kind of like a camera obscura and probably inspired by camera obscura, which would have come earlier, I think. But Pepper's Ghost enabled using kind of mirrors and light and shadow to create a hologram, essentially. Incredible to think that was created. And the first work you see when you come in is a work by Tara McKenzie, who's a Melbourne-based artist, using that Pepper's Ghost pre-cinema technology to create a contemporary version of it. And we're really interested in that conversation between the past and the innovations of the past and the present. Camera obscura is not currently in the exhibition. It will be. It'll be in our kind of next iteration. The big focuses we've had have been around sort of a big focus on kind of projection, the arrival of the projector, particularly through the magic lantern. So the glass magic lantern slides, so there's a big display on that. We've looked at the phenomenon of the sort of zoetrope and those sorts of things where mechanically you spin a series of static images which then appear to be animated. And so that's kind of where we focus currently, but camera obscura is definitely on our next list to purposefully display.
Really attractive interest because so much of our was controlled by plugging electricity.
Yes. It's just shadow and light. Well, that's a fantastic idea. So just to say that, the interesting thing about camera obscura is it's entirely sort of light and shadow driven. It doesn't require a plug. It's not a machine, even though it's kind of a piece of technology, interestingly, yeah. Yes?
How big's your power bill?
The power bill is, I can't give you a figure, it's quite big, but we actually have been working really hard to reduce the carbon footprint. And obviously we rely on electricity, and of course the cloud, going into the cloud is actually very power hungry. But we are working at the moment to be carbon neutral by 2025, which we think we're going to get to, which is pretty exciting. But yes, there's a lot of power. But you can do things like, even just the simple thing of going to LED lighting and all of those sorts of things, and reducing the sort of the machinery and making it a more sophisticated kind of delivery mechanism is actually reducing our power consumption. But I have to say the cloud is cranking it back up again. Yes?
You were saying before in the presentation that in new offices you're co-located with a number of businesses. And I was just wondering what sort of businesses they were and how they can
So just being asked about the kind of businesses in our co-working space. So a really broad range. I mean, over time we've had sort of individual practitioners, script writers, freelance producers. We've had video game companies. At one point, we had 8 desks being occupied by a company that do YouTube channel aggregation. You know, where you pull together content and make a YouTube channel. We've got the Australian International Documentary Conference in there, and also Experimenter, which is a national organisation looking at sort of new media art. It's very, very broad. And again, just looking at that sort of ecology of practitioners. And the idea is, you know, but that by proximity, conversation and collaboration happens between them, but also with us. And we found that to be really very fruitful. Yeah. Any other questions? Right.
Thank you so much, Katrina. Thank you so much, Katrina. The Naomi Milgram Foundation works to champion the role that art, design and architecture can play in improving lives. And I think that the work that ACME does it exemplifies this, and the opportunities ahead for Benalla Art Gallery, which is the most beautiful starting point for the ambitions that I think are held for what could happen here in Benalla. I think they're the perfect ingredients. Thank you so much for coming today and talking about particularly the ecosystem, something that I'm really conscious of, the power of that ecosystem. You mentioned our flagship program, MPavilion, which is where we collaborate with Benalla Art Gallery and bringing our programming up into this area and collaborating. And the MPavilion is very much the sum of its parts. We create this staging point, sometimes a venue, sometimes a catalyst, and people from Victoria join the program and we work with them to present the work. Often people, they're new to it or there might be new collaborations. And we will work with them closely to enable that work, often exploratory, help them market it, make sure there's an audience there, it's all run safely. And what we see is something really tremendous created that then goes on to have another life. So hearing about ACME X and how it has all these other businesses involved, the capacity building, the education being part of it as well, these are such important considerations and I think really demonstrate what opportunities there are for cultural infrastructure, which is why when Eric and I have been talking for the last 2 years, we really wanted to work with Eric to explore this topic with you and hope that this can contribute some ideas and some examples of what's possible and help you challenge the government to meet you and make it really everything it could be. So thank you for the opportunity. This is the first of a series of 4. Our work here has been enabled by the RACV, our own foundation, the Naomi Milgram Foundation, and the wonderful people here at the Benalla Art Gallery. We will have the second of this series of 4 on the 30th of January. Nicole Durling, who was formerly the senior curator at Mona in Tasmania, she was there for 15 years. And she said the greatest lesson was to be brave, and this approach to creativity and to life is what allowed Mona to flourish. And there can be no doubt that Mona has demonstrated the power that a cultural institution can have to challenge creatively and socially, but also economically. So that'll be exciting. And she's actually moved to the Craft Victoria as Executive Director, which is an interesting coincidence because you have an exhibition here right now from Craft Victoria, which will close tomorrow. And so I encourage you to have a look at that, Temporal Artefacts, which concludes tomorrow. So thank you so much for your time this morning on this beautiful day in Benalla, and thanks for having us, and look forward to seeing you in January.